The silent cabin. Ethan Miller had spent most of his life surrounded by noise. The city was always loud, filled with machines, shouting people, and endless sirens. For years he worked as an engineer, building defense systems for wars that he didn't believe in anymore. When the last conflict ended, he didn't feel victorious, he only felt tired. His mind carried the weight of every explosion he had heard, every scream that echoed through the walls of metal cities. One day, he packed everything into an old truck and drove far away from civilization. He drove until the roads turned into dirt, until the mobile signals disappeared, and until mountains covered the sky like massive, silent guardians. There, hidden between tall pine trees, he found a small wooden cabin for sale. The cabin stood alone on a hill, facing a deep forest. There were no neighbors. No noise, just wind and birds. The moment Ethan stepped onto the porch, he felt something strange. The silence was almost too perfect, as if the forest was holding its breath. Still, he smiled for the first time in months. He signed the papers, moved in, and told himself this would be his new beginning. The cabin was old, but strong. The wood creaked when he walked, but it felt real. Not artificial like the city walls. Ethan spent the first few days cleaning, fixing windows, and making the fireplace work again. At night, he would sit by the fire with a book in his hand, listening to the wind move through the trees. The sound calmed his heart. But on the fourth night, something changed. Ethan was lying in bed when he felt a light vibration under the floor. It was faint at first, like distant thunder. He sat up, thinking it was just the wind pushing against the cabin walls. He waited, listening carefully. The vibration came again, slow and steady, almost like breathing. He grabbed a flashlight and walked through the cabin. The wooden floor was cold beneath his feet. He followed the sound to a locked door in the hallway, a door that led to the basement. The previous owner had told him the basement was used for storing tools and old furniture. Nothing more, but the sound was definitely coming from there. Ethan reached for the old metal handle, but his dog, Max, suddenly started barking. Max was usually calm, but now his fur stood up, and he backed away from the door, growling low. Ethan frowned. He had seen Max chase bears away without fear, so his reaction was unsettling. He slowly turned the handle, but the door didn't open. It was locked tight. He stepped back and decided to check it in the morning. Maybe the house had pipes or some kind of natural movement underground, but as he turned away, he heard something that froze him in place. A soft scratch came from the other side of the door, then another, slow, deliberate, like claws dragging on wood. Ethan's breath caught in his throat. Max whined and ran to the corner, refusing to come near the basement door again. The next morning, Ethan went outside to clear his head. The air was cold and mist hung between the trees. He walked around the cabin, checking for signs of animals. There were no footprints, no broken boards, no signs of entry. Everything looked completely normal. Still, that night the vibration returned, stronger than before. It pulsed through the wooden floor like a slow heartbeat. Ethan couldn't sleep. He sat in his chair, staring at the locked door. His logical mind told him it was probably just an animal trapped below, maybe a raccoon or something similar. But deep inside, he felt it wasn't that simple. On the sixth night, he decided to open the basement no matter what. He took his tools, broke the rusty lock, and slowly pulled the door open. A cold gust of air hit his face. It smelled like wet earth and something metallic. The flashlight beam cut through the darkness, revealing steep wooden stairs that disappeared into blackness. Max refused to follow. He barked twice, then ran into the other room. Ethan took a deep breath and started descending. Each step creaked under his weight. The air grew colder with every step. The vibration was now clear and close, echoing softly against the walls. When he reached the bottom, he saw that the basement was larger than he expected. The stone walls were cracked, and part of the ground had caved in. As he moved the flashlight slowly, he noticed something strange. Metal fragments buried in the soil, not like any tool he had ever seen. They shimmered faintly, almost alive. Suddenly, the beam of light landed on something in the far corner. Two glowing eyes stared back at him, low to the ground, unmoving. The light reflected off them like twin orbs. Ethan froze. His heart pounded in his chest. He tried to tell himself it was an animal, but the shape was too large, too strange. Then, a low sound filled the basement. It wasn't a growl. It wasn't a hiss. It was something between a sigh and a whisper, deep and otherworldly. The eyes blinked slowly. Deliberately, as if studying him, Ethan gripped the flashlight tighter. Every instinct told him to run, but something in those eyes held him still. For the first time in years, Ethan felt a different kind of fear, not the kind that comes from war or human violence, but the kind that comes from meeting something unknown, something that didn't belong to this world. The wind howled outside the cabin, but down in the basement everything was still. Two beings stood in silence, one human, one hidden in shadow, and the mountains seemed to listen. The injured queen. Ethan stood frozen at the bottom of the stairs, his flashlight locked on the pair of glowing eyes staring back at him from the dark corner. The silence between them stretched like a tight wire. His heart pounded in his chest, echoing through his ears. But he forced himself to take a slow breath, trying to calm his racing thoughts. The eyes blinked once, slowly, and then a low humming sound filled the basement. It wasn't mechanical, but it wasn't entirely organic either. It felt like a mix of energy and pain, a sound that made the hair on his arms rise. He tightened his grip on the flashlight and took a step forward. The wooden floor creaked beneath him, and the creature shifted slightly, revealing more of its body. In the dim light, Ethan saw a massive figure curled up against the cracked stone wall. Its skin shimmered faintly like wet metal, reflecting the beam of the flashlight in strange patterns. Long limbs folded close to its body, and a set of delicate, translucent membranes covered part of its form like a broken cocoon. It wasn't an animal from Earth. He knew that instantly. No creature he had ever seen had a presence like this. Heavy and regal, even in its weakened state. The creature's breathing was slow and uneven, and beneath the alien glow, he noticed something else. Wounds. Deep cuts across its body that oozed a faint silver light instead of blood. Ethan felt an unexpected emotion rise inside him. It wasn't fear anymore. It was something closer to concern. This creature, whatever it was injured and hiding here beneath his cabin. It hadn't attacked him even though he was standing right in front of it. It was just watching, waiting, breathing in slow, pained rhythms. He swallowed hard and whispered almost to himself, "What are you?" The creature didn't speak, but suddenly, his mind filled with a faint echo, a voice without sound, like a thought that wasn't his own. It was broken and weak, but clear enough for him to understand one word. "Help!" Ethan stumbled back, his heart jumping. He looked around the empty basement, trying to find speakers or some hidden trick, but there was nothing. The voice had come from the creature. It was speaking directly into his mind. He raised his flashlight again, and this time, he noticed something beneath its body. A strange symbol carved into the floor, glowing faintly. It looked like a landing mark or a damaged teleportation point. Pieces of metallic debris were scattered around it, as if something had crashed violently and then crawled to this corner to survive. The creature shifted again, revealing more of its figure, and Ethan realized it wasn't just some alien animal. It had a shape that carried purpose and intelligence. Its head was crowned with ridges that formed a natural crest. Almost like a crown, its eyes were large, black, and reflective. Yet there was something undeniably aware in them, something that observed him as much as he observed it. It wasn't a beast, it was a ruler hiding in the shadows. Ethan's logical mind screamed at him to run, to report this to the authorities, but his instincts, shaped by years of war and survival, told him something else. He saw the deep wounds, the uneven breathing, the faint tremble in the creature's limbs. Whatever it was dying. He slowly lowered his flashlight to avoid blinding it, took a deep breath and said, "If you understand me, blink twice." To his shock, the creature blinked twice, slowly and deliberately. He felt another wave of thought touch his mind, faint but desperate, hunted, hiding, hurt. In that moment, Ethan understood the truth. This creature wasn't here to attack. It was running from something, hiding beneath his cabin like a wounded monarch seeking shelter. He crouched slowly, keeping his movements calm so he wouldn't provoke it. He opened his backpack and pulled out a bottle of water. He placed it on the floor and gently pushed it toward the creature. The alien's eyes followed the bottle. Then one long limb reached out with surprising grace. It uncapped the bottle without touching it, as if using some kind of telekinetic ability, and the water floated up in shimmering droplets before disappearing into its mouth. Ethan couldn't believe what he was seeing. As the creature drank, its breathing became a little steadier. It looked at him again, and this time the mental voice came clearer. Though still weak, I am Queen. The word struck him. It wasn't just a title. It carried weight, authority, and desperation. This was no ordinary alien. This was a queen, hiding beneath his cabin like a fugitive. He stood up slowly, his mind racing with possibilities. If something powerful enough to injure her was still out there, then he might be sitting on top of a danger far bigger than he ever imagined. He asked softly, "Who hurt you?" The response came in broken thoughts, flashes of burning ships, betrayal, and a group of shadowy figures with sharp silver armor hunting her through space. Hunters. Betrayed. Crash. Hide. Each word felt heavy in his mind, like it carried pain too deep to speak out loud. Ethan took a deep breath and looked toward the basement stairs. He knew that if anyone found out about this, they wouldn't come to help. They would bring soldiers, scientists, and weapons. They would dissect her, lock her away, or worse. They wouldn't see her as a living being, only as a threat. He looked back at the Queen, who was watching him silently, waiting for his choice. He didn't know why, but something inside him whispered that turning her in would be the beginning of something terrible. Maybe it was the way she looked at him, not with fear, but with the quiet dignity of someone who had lost everything and still refused to beg. Or maybe it was the part of him that was tired of following orders, tired of wars, tired of letting others decide what was right. In that cold basement, beneath the silent cabin, a wounded alien queen and a lone human engineer stared at each other. Their worlds were completely different, but something passed between them, an unspoken understanding that fate had brought them together for a reason. The choice. Ethan sat alone at his kitchen table the next morning, staring at the rising mist outside the cabin window. The cold mountain air filled the room through a small crack in the wood, but he barely noticed. His mind was trapped between fear and responsibility. The events of the previous night replayed in his head again and again. The glowing eyes in the darkness, the telepathic voice whispering for help, the word Queen echoing in his mind like a drumbeat. He had come to these mountains searching for silence, but what he found beneath his floor was something that could shake the stars. He rubbed his face with both hands, trying to think logically. If he reported what he saw, the government would arrive within hours. Soldiers, scientists, and heavy machinery would surround his land. They would drag the alien queen out like a specimen, cage her, interrogate her, dissect her, and maybe even weaponize her. Humanity had never handled the unknown with kindness, and deep down, he knew it wouldn't be different this time. On the other hand, if he kept her presence a secret, he was putting himself in danger. If her hunters were real, they could find her location, and then his cabin would become the center of a war he never asked for. He looked down at Max, who sat quietly by his side. The dog had sensed something unusual from the beginning, but now he was strangely calm, as if he had accepted the Queen's presence downstairs. Ethan exhaled slowly and stood up, his boots echoing against the wooden floor as he walked to the basement door. He unlocked it and descended the stairs. The Queen was still in the corner, her body curled, glowing faintly like dying embers, but when she saw him, her black reflective eyes brightened slightly, and he felt a wave of tired relief wash through his mind. "You returned," the voice whispered softly inside his head. He approached her slowly, crouching down beside the broken floor where the strange landing symbol still glowed faintly. He placed a small first aid kit on the ground, unsure if it would even help her, but it was all he had. The Queen tilted her head slightly, observing the human gesture with a mixture of curiosity and quiet dignity. He wasn't sure if his medical supplies would work on an alien body, but he did what he knew best. He cleaned the edges of one wound with a sterilizing cloth, and to his surprise, the alien skin reacted by sealing slightly. Like liquid metal cooling under pressure, the queen gave a low hum, not of pain, but of relief. And for the first time, Ethan felt her trust deepen, like a soft pulse between their minds as he worked. She shared more fragmented images through telepathy. Ethan saw flashes of vast alien fleets, burning skies, betrayal in a royal court, and silver-armored hunters tearing through her ships. She was once the leader of a peaceful faction that tried to resist galactic warlords, but someone close to her betrayed her. Her ship was ambushed near Earth, heavily damaged, and she crashed in the mountains months ago, hiding in the basement to heal and avoid detection. Her presence on Earth was accidental, but her enemies were relentless. "They will come," she whispered. "They will burn to find me." Ethan's hands froze for a moment. He realized this was bigger than just one creature hiding beneath his home. If these hunters came, they might not just target the queen. They could target everything around her, including him, including the planet. He swallowed hard, his mind racing. He could run, leave the cabin, abandon everything, pretend he never saw her. But as he looked into her exhausted but determined eyes, he felt something stir inside him. A feeling he hadn't felt in years. During the war, he had followed orders without question. He had seen cruelty disguised as justice, and he had grown tired of watching the innocent suffer. Now he stood at a crossroads again, except this time, no general was giving him commands. This time, the choice was his alone. He asked her, "If they find you here, what will they do to Earth?" Her mental voice grew heavier. "If they find me, they will not risk your world rising to protect me. They will purge it." The word purge struck him like a cold blade. He imagined alien ships hovering over cities, burning forests, oceans boiling under energy fire. It wasn't just his life at stake. It was the entire planet, the queen added softly. "I can hide for a little while, but not forever. They track energy. They follow whispers." Ethan stood slowly, pacing the room. Every part of his logical mind screamed to call someone, to hand this burden to people with power. But his heart knew how those people would treat her. He remembered the way she had blinked twice when he asked if she understood him, the way she drank water without hurting him, the way her wounds reacted to his help. She was intelligent, vulnerable, and despite her title, she hadn't tried to control or harm him. She had asked for help like a living being, not a conqueror. Finally, Ethan stopped pacing and faced her. His voice was steady. "I won't turn you in." The moment he said the words, he felt her reaction not through her face but through the sudden warmth that filled his mind. It was like standing near a glowing fire after a long winter. "Thank you," she whispered, the words carrying not just gratitude but a kind of solemn bond. He knelt and started planning aloud, talking to himself more than to her. "We need to block energy signals, hide heat signatures, build barriers, keep the place quiet. If they track you through space, we need to make this cabin invisible." She watched him with quiet intensity, and he could feel her respect growing. In her world, humans might be seen as fragile, but in this moment, Ethan was becoming something else. Not just a host, but a protector. That night, as darkness wrapped around the mountains, Ethan sat by the basement stairs, rifle leaning against the wall, flashlight beside him. His mind was exhausted but determined. He had made his choice. There was no going back beneath the cabin. The wounded alien queen rested in silence above her, a human man prepared to face something far bigger than himself. And somewhere beyond the stars, unseen ships began to move, following a faint signal toward Earth, hunters among the trees. Days passed slowly in the quiet mountains, but the silence around Ethan's cabin began to change in subtle ways. The birds that once filled the morning air with their songs grew silent earlier each day. Deer that usually wandered near the forest's edge stopped appearing, and Max, who loved roaming freely among the trees, began barking at the darkness more often. As if sensing something unseen watching from afar, Ethan worked tirelessly around the cabin, building signal blockers from old engineering parts. burying metal plates to distort scanners and rewiring generators to produce false readings. He covered windows with thermal-absorbing sheets and camouflaged the roof with layers of branches and mud, turning his peaceful home into a hidden fortress. He didn't know exactly what kind of technology the hunters used, but his instincts told him that stealth would be their first enemy, not firepower. One evening, just as the sun was setting behind the peaks, Ethan climbed onto the roof with a pair of old binoculars. He scanned the distant tree line, expecting nothing, but what he saw made his stomach tighten. A flicker of unnatural light danced between the shadows, like a brief shimmer of glass catching sunlight. Then, slowly, figures emerged from the darkness. Moving in perfect formation, they were tall and thin, wrapped in metallic armor that glowed faintly along their spines. Their heads were covered by smooth helmets without visible eyes, and their movements were silent, too silent. Not even leaves rustled beneath their feet. There were at least 6 of them, walking toward the forest slope below his cabin, and they carried devices that hummed softly, pulsing in a rhythm that made the air feel heavier. Ethan lowered the binoculars and climbed down, his heart pounding in his chest. The hunters had arrived just as the Queen had warned, and they were closer than he had ever imagined. He rushed into the basement, where the Queen was resting with her body partially healed. Her wounds had closed into smooth silver scars and her breathing was stronger. When she saw his face, she didn't need to ask. Her voice slipped into his mind like a cold wind. "They are here." He nodded. Grabbing his old rifle and a bag of homemade EMP grenades he had built using leftover components, he had once designed devices like these for soldiers. But now they were his only line of defense. They moved quickly to prepare. The Queen closed her eyes and extended a faint telepathic field outward, scanning the forest with senses far sharper than his. Her thoughts came to him in fragments. Scouts. Searching. Scanning energy. Careful. He turned off all unnecessary power sources in the cabin, letting darkness fill the rooms. Outside, the forest grew unnaturally quiet, as if the night itself was holding its breath. Ethan peeked through a narrow gap in the wooden wall and saw the first hunter appear at the edge of the clearing. Its armor shimmered slightly with each step, and in its hands it carried a small drone that floated above the ground like a glowing eye. The drone released a pulse of blue light that washed over the clearing like ripples in water. Ethan understood immediately that the pulse was scanning for life or energy signatures. He activated one of his jamming devices, a crude but effective machine hidden beneath the porch. The next pulse scattered, breaking into static before it could reflect back to the hunters. One of them tilted its head slightly, as if confused, and tapped its wrist device. More drones lifted into the air, spreading through the forest like a swarm of glowing insects. They were thorough and systematic, clearly well-trained. Ethan knew he couldn't take them head-on. Their technology and numbers would overwhelm him in seconds. He needed to be smarter. He quietly slipped out the back door and moved through the trees like a shadow, carrying 2 EMP grenades. He set one on a high branch near a rocky slope and connected it to a thin tripwire. The second he buried beneath fallen leaves near a narrow path that led to the clearing. These traps wouldn't kill them, but they would disrupt their equipment and give him precious time. His years as an engineer in war zones had taught him how to outthink stronger enemies, and now those skills were all that stood between survival and disaster. Meanwhile, inside the basement, the Queen extended her telepathic senses further. She whispered into his mind, "They are searching deeper. They follow faint echoes. They smell energy." Her mental tone was calm but heavy with warning. She wasn't afraid, but she understood exactly what kind of hunters these were. They were not random mercenaries, they were elite trackers, trained to follow wounded royalty across galaxies. Night fell completely, covering the forest in darkness. The only light came from the hunters' drones and the faint glow of their armor. Ethan crouched behind a log, watching as 2 of them approached the tripwire. The first drone floated over it harmlessly, but the hunter itself stepped forward and triggered the device. A sharp click was followed by a blinding burst of electromagnetic energy. The drone dropped like a rock, its lights flickering out, and the hunter's armor flashed with erratic sparks. It staggered for a moment. Confused and disoriented, Ethan didn't wait. He used the distraction to disable a second drone with a precise rifle shot, the bullet hitting its core and shattering it into glowing fragments. The forest erupted into silent chaos. Hunters turned their heads sharply, their armor lights shifting to a blood-red hue. Two broke formation and started scanning the trees rapidly. Their movements were unnervingly fast. Almost like predators sniffing for prey, Ethan pulled back slowly. Using his knowledge of terrain to disappear into the woods, he wasn't trying to win. He was trying to make them waste time, create doubt, and push them away from the cabin's exact location. Inside the basement, the Queen raised her head and whispered in his mind, "More will come. These are the first." Her voice carried a sense of certainty that made his blood run cold. This was only the beginning. The real danger was still far beyond the stars, but now the hunt had reached his doorstep. He returned to the cabin just before dawn, exhausted but alive. The hunters had retreated temporarily, leaving broken drones scattered across the forest floor, but he knew they hadn't left for good. They were regrouping, recalibrating their scanners, and soon they would return with even greater precision. As the first rays of light touched the mountain peaks, Ethan stood on the porch, staring at the forest that now hid deadly enemies within its shadows. His hands were dirty, his body tired, but his resolve was stronger than ever. He had bought himself and the Queen a little more time, and in this silent war, every hour counted. The first battle. The sun had barely risen when Ethan began reinforcing every inch of his cabin. He moved like a man preparing for a storm, silent and focused. He knew the hunters would return, and when they did, they would not make the same mistakes as before. Their first approach had been reconnaissance, testing the ground and learning his defenses. The next one would be a direct strike, designed to eliminate all resistance swiftly. He set up new traps in wider circles, laid down hidden EMP mines in the dirt, and connected a web of motion sensors to a silent alert system that flickered on his wristwatch. Inside the cabin, he reinforced the doors with steel bars, locked windows with heavy shutters, and created fallback positions just like he used to in his days as an engineer during war campaigns. Each movement was careful, practiced, and fueled by a quiet determination. The Queen watched him from the basement, her wounds mostly sealed now. Her black, reflective eyes followed every action with a calm but intense focus. Through their mental link, Ethan could feel her emotions, not in words, but in soft waves of energy. She respected his preparations. But beneath that respect was a shadow of sadness. She understood that the hunters would not leave peacefully. Her telepathic whispers carried images of their ruthlessness, of burning hideouts on distant planets, of captured royal kin dragged through starships in chains. She was a queen in exile, hiding in the shadows of a foreign world, and the hunters were relentless servants of her enemies. "They will strike at night," she warned softly. "They always strike when shadows cover fear." Ethan nodded, adjusting his rifle and checking the EMP detonators. He had converted his entire property into a defensive web, not because he believed he could overpower them, but because he planned to outthink them. He didn't have laser weapons or high-tech armor, but he understood terrain, strategy, and improvisation. And sometimes that was more dangerous than brute force. The hunters saw humans as primitive, and he intended to use that arrogance against them. As night approached, a cold fog crept down from the mountains. Wrapping the forest in a gray curtain, the trees swayed gently, their silhouettes stretching like watchful giants. Ethan sat near a darkened window with his rifle across his lap. Max lay silently beside him, ears twitching at the faintest sound. In the basement, the Queen closed her eyes and extended her senses outward like invisible tendrils, searching through the forest for disturbances. Her presence in his mind grew sharper. "They come," she whispered. They split into 3 groups. Ethan inhaled slowly, letting his heartbeat fall into a controlled rhythm. The attack began suddenly, not with sound but with light. 3 drones appeared over the tree line, their bodies glowing with a hard blue light, sweeping beams through the forest like a net searching for prey. Then the hunters emerged behind them, moving like shadows between the fog. Their red armor lights pulsed in unison. and their formation was tight, efficient, and silent. They surrounded the cabin slowly, not rushing. Confident in their superiority, Ethan triggered his first trap. A buried EMP mine exploded with a sharp burst of energy. 2 drones fell immediately, their lights flickering out. One hunter staggered as his armor glitched violently, giving Ethan the opening to fire a clean shot through the exposed joint near the shoulder. The bullet didn't kill, but it forced the hunter to retreat behind a tree, leaking sparks like blood. The silence shattered after that. Beams of concentrated energy ripped through the fog, burning holes into the wooden walls. The cabin shook as one of the energy blasts struck a support beam. Ethan rolled behind cover, reloading quickly. He pressed a switch on his wrist, activating a line of improvised spike launchers he had set along the eastern approach. Sharp metallic rods shot out of the ground like spears, impaling 2 drones mid-flight and causing one hunter to stumble backward. The battle was no longer a distant threat. It was happening right at his doorstep. In the basement, the Queen rose slowly, her strength not fully recovered but her resolve unshaken. She extended her hands, and a soft silver glow surrounded her body. She focused, sending out a psychic pulse that rippled through the ground like an invisible shockwave. The nearest hunter froze mid-step, its limbs locking up as if invisible hands gripped it tightly. Ethan took advantage of the moment and fired another shot, hitting the creature's chest plate and knocking it to the ground. For the first time, he saw them hesitate. These were elite killers, but they hadn't expected coordinated resistance from a lone human and a wounded queen. The hunters regrouped quickly. 2 moved toward the basement entrance. Clearly trying to reach the queen, Ethan sprinted outside through the back door, sliding down a small slope toward their flank. He grabbed a rock and hurled it toward a distant sensor, drawing their attention for a split second, then detonated an EMP grenade from his belt. The explosion threw the hunters off balance. Their suits sparking wildly, Ethan emerged from the shadows, firing controlled bursts to drive them back from the basement. He wasn't fighting like a soldier following orders. He was fighting like a survivor defending his home. Every move unpredictable and sharp. The Queen's power flared again, sending a surge through Ethan's mind. "Left," she warned. He spun just in time to dodge a beam that cut through the air where his head had been a second ago. He dove behind a tree, breathing hard, adrenaline burning through his veins. Max barked furiously from inside the cabin, drawing the attention of another drone. Ethan quickly aimed and shot it down before it could target the dog. The night turned into a battlefield of light and shadows, of human cunning against alien precision. After nearly 20 minutes of intense fighting, the remaining hunters retreated into the forest, dragging their injured with them. Drones lay scattered like broken stars across the clearing, and smoke rose from scorched trees. Ethan stood in the cold night air, his hands shaking from exhaustion but his eyes fierce. He had held them off, not because he had superior weapons, but because he refused to give ground. He walked back to the cabin, where the Queen stood at the bottom of the stairs, her glowing form illuminating the darkness. Their eyes met, and without words, they both understood that this was only the first battle. The real war was just beginning. The Alliance, the night after the battle, was eerily still. The forest around the cabin smelled faintly of scorched bark and burnt electronics. Twisted remains of alien drones lay scattered like dead fireflies, and the soil was littered with footprints from both hunter and human. Ethan sat on the porch with his rifle resting against his knees, his breathing steady but his mind alive with thoughts. He had survived the first wave, but it was clear that the hunters were regrouping. They had retreated not out of defeat but to reassess, recalibrate, and prepare a stronger assault. He looked out over the fog-covered trees and understood that if he stayed on the defensive, eventually they would overwhelm him. The Queen was powerful, but she was still weakened, and this remote cabin was never meant to withstand a prolonged war. He rose before dawn and descended into the basement. The Queen was waiting for him, standing upright now, her once dim glow brighter and more focused. Her silver scars shimmered faintly, and her black reflective eyes locked onto him with a calm intensity. Through their growing telepathic bond, he didn't need to speak to make her feel his determination. She could sense his thoughts like faint echoes. his memories like old scars etched into the walls of his mind. She showed him her gratitude not with words, but through a gentle wave of warm energy. Like standing close to a comforting fire on a cold night, she had seen his courage during the battle, how he had defended her even when he could have fled, and that act had created something deeper between them. Not just trust, but a shared purpose. Ethan set his tools on the floor and began outlining his plan aloud, pacing slowly. If they come again, and they will, we can't just sit here waiting. We need to strengthen your defenses, and we need something bigger than traps and rifles. The Queen tilted her head slightly, listening, then she raised one hand and the basement walls began to glow faintly. Symbols appeared in the stone like old runes coming alive. She was revealing something she had kept hidden until now. A deep vibration filled the air, and part of the floor shifted, opening like a mechanical door disguised beneath layers of dirt and wood. Ethan stared in shock as a vast metallic chamber was revealed below. He climbed down a ladder and found himself standing inside what looked like the upper deck of a buried starship. Massive and ancient, covered in vines and soil. The Queen floated down behind him, her voice echoing clearly in his mind. This ship carried my court, my guardians, my memories. When we crashed, most systems buried themselves to avoid detection, but the core still sleeps. Her hands touched a glowing panel, and light rippled through the walls like veins awakening. Ethan walked slowly through the chamber, his eyes wide as he recognized control interfaces, power conduits, and structural layouts that hinted at engineering far beyond anything on Earth. Yet some of the technology seemed intuitive, almost familiar to him as an engineer, as if the logic of design, even across species, followed similar principles. He ran his hands over the panel and muttered, "If we can get this working again, this changes everything." The Queen nodded slowly. "I cannot repair it alone. My strength is not enough, but your mind understands machines. If we work together, we can awaken it." Ethan felt a spark of energy flow between them, not just telepathic communication, but something deeper. Their skills complemented each other. She understood the biological and psychic aspects of her technology, while he understood physical structure, electrical flow, and tactical application. For the first time since her arrival, they were not just hiding, they were building something. They spent the next several days working in secret within the buried ship. Ethan brought tools, wires, and materials from his workshop while the Queen directed him with silent gestures and mental blueprints. She showed him where conduits had fused, where power lines were severed, and where shielding arrays lay dormant beneath layers of rock. At first, the work was overwhelming, the scale of the ship beyond anything he had ever imagined. But slowly, through patience and communication, they repaired section after section. Lights flickered back to life, panels hummed with low energy, and dormant engines groaned like ancient beasts awakening from a long sleep. Max would sit at the edge of the open floor, tilting his head as if sensing the ancient power returning beneath their feet. During these long nights of work, Ethan and the Queen began to understand each other on a level words could never reach. She showed him images of her world, vast crystal cities floating between stars, oceans glowing with living light, and her people kneeling before her in peace before betrayal shattered everything. He shared with her flashes of his own world, childhood in a quiet town, the deafening chaos of human wars, the loneliness that brought him to these mountains. Two completely different lives began to intertwine, not as ruler and subject, but as equals with a shared enemy. Meanwhile, the hunters did not remain idle. From the roof, Ethan watched through binoculars as more flickers of unnatural light appeared deep in the forest. New ships landing under the cover of fog. Their presence was growing and time was slipping away. But this time, Ethan did not feel powerless in the heart of the mountains. Beneath his simple wooden cabin, a buried alien starship was awakening under the combined will of a human engineer and an exiled queen. One evening, as they reconnected the main power core, the entire chamber burst into radiant light. The engines roared softly like a distant thunderstorm, and Ethan felt the floor vibrate under his boots. The Queen turned to him, her presence strong and resolute, When the next wave comes, we will not hide. We will fight together." He met her gaze without hesitation, something fierce and unshakable in his eyes. For the first time in years, he wasn't just surviving. He was choosing to stand for something greater. As the sun set behind the mountains, the cabin above remained quiet and unassuming. But deep below, ancient alien metal hummed like a sleeping giant stirring from slumber. And in that chamber, a fragile but powerful alliance was born, one that would soon face the fury of the stars. Humanity's answer, the night before the coming storm, was unlike any Ethan had experienced. The mountains were quiet, too quiet, as if every creature in the forest sensed what was approaching. Fog rolled down the slopes like a living thing. Covering the trees in thick white layers, the air grew heavy with static, and even Max stayed close to Ethan's side, his ears lowered, growling softly at the empty darkness beyond the porch. Ethan stood on the roof of the cabin with his binoculars, scanning the horizon again and again, and finally, just before dawn, he saw it, far above the treetops. Faint lights appeared in the sky like falling stars, except they were not falling. They were descending, a fleet of alien vessels. Sleek and shaped like blades of light, pierced through the atmosphere in perfect formation. The hunters were no longer hiding in shadows, they were bringing their full force. Ethan climbed down and hurried to the basement. The Queen was waiting in the buried starship's command chamber, her body glowing brightly, her presence in his mind sharper than ever. "They come with their full strength," she whispered. "This is the final hunt." He nodded, his jaw set with quiet resolve. The last few days had transformed them both. The ship that once slept beneath the mountains was now alive, its systems repaired and humming with renewed power. Ethan had connected human ingenuity with alien technology in ways neither of them thought possible. He had installed reinforced shielding on the outer hull, rerouted energy lines to boost propulsion, and integrated simple manual switches where alien systems had failed. Together, they had turned a buried relic into a living warship. As the alien fleet drew closer, the mountains shook with their arrival. Dozens of smaller hunter ships descended through the clouds like dark birds. Forming a ring around the valley, their lights illuminated the fog in an eerie blue glow. The hunters were not coming quietly this time. They were announcing their presence, warning everything below that resistance was pointless. Ethan looked at the Queen, and she looked back at him. There were no speeches, no grand promises, just a silent exchange of determination between two beings from different worlds. They climbed into the ship's control chamber, where Ethan took his position at the engineering console, and the Queen stood at the center of the bridge, her hands raised over a glowing sphere that responded to her every thought. The ground above the cabin cracked as the buried ship began to rise, centuries of earth and wood breaking away as the vessel emerged like a sleeping giant tearing through its tomb. Trees toppled as the ship's hull reflected the pale morning light. Hunters on the ground turned their scanners toward the rising craft, but it was too late to stop it. The engines roared, shaking the mountains, and the alien ship lifted into the sky with Ethan and the Queen standing side by side within its bridge. For the first time, he saw Earth from above through alien glass panels, the misty forest shrinking beneath them as they rose to meet the invading fleet. The first wave of hunter fighters swarmed toward them like a storm of steel. Beams of concentrated energy sliced through the air. But Ethan had prepared for this. He had reinforced the shielding systems, layering human metal plating between alien fields. When the first barrage struck, the shields held, shimmering like a silver bubble under pressure. The Queen extended her psychic energy through the ship, weaving commands with thought alone, and their vessel moved like a living creature. Spinning gracefully between enemy fire, Ethan activated auxiliary cannons, reprogrammed by his hands to fire bursts that disrupted the hunters' scanners. For the first time, the hunters' perfect formations faltered as their systems flickered with static. The Queen's eyes glowed brighter as she released a psychic roar through the void, a sound that was not heard but felt. It spread through the battlefield like a shockwave, rattling the enemy ships and momentarily breaking their coordination. Her voice, the voice of a true monarch, reached them even through the vacuum of space. Reminding them who they were hunting, Ethan seized the moment. Redirecting energy to the thrusters, pushing the ship through the fractured enemy line with surgical precision. Explosions rippled through the sky as hunter vessels collided, their arrogance shaken by resistance they had never expected from a single world. More ships descended from orbit, massive hunter carriers shaped like blades, their hulls glowing with energy. The Queen whispered in his mind, "This is their core fleet." Ethan tightened his grip on the controls, sweat rolling down his forehead. "Then let's show them what happens when you corner humanity," he muttered. He activated a hidden override he had built into the ship's systems, channeling excess energy into a concentrated forward burst. Together, he and the Queen guided the vessel straight through the heart of the hunter fleet, weaving between blasts like a predator among prey. Inside their ships, the hunters were efficient, logical, and cold. They saw humans as weak creatures who hid behind stone and wood, but now, facing the fury of a single human engineer and a wounded alien queen, their perfect calculations began to fail. Ethan used terrain knowledge, pulling the fight lower into the mountain valleys, forcing the hunters to adjust to narrow air currents they weren't designed for. The Queen amplified his strategies, sending telepathic interference to confuse their targeting systems. Their partnership became seamless, almost instinctive. Her mind was the heart of the ship, and his hands were its beating engine. The battle raged for hours, energy beams lighting up the sky like lightning, trees shaking from the thunder of alien engines. And slowly the tide began to turn, one by one. Hunter vessels were destroyed or forced to retreat. Their once flawless formation broke apart under the combined force of human unpredictability and alien psychic might. In a final act of defiance, the Queen unleashed a focused psychic strike on the enemy flagship. Shattering its command structure, the ship erupted into a burning arc across the dawn sky, and the remaining hunters scattered, disappearing into the upper atmosphere like frightened birds fleeing a storm. When silence finally returned, Ethan and the Queen stood inside the glowing bridge. Looking out at the sky, her voice came softly into his mind. "They will remember this day." He nodded slowly, exhaustion washing over him, but beneath that exhaustion was a quiet strength. The hunters had come to hunt a wounded queen, but they had encountered something far greater, the unbreakable spirit of a human who refused to surrender. The ship descended slowly back toward the mountain. Settling into its hidden chamber once again, the forest was scarred but alive, and the cabin stood as a silent witness to what had happened above. From that day on, whispers began to spread through the distant stars, whispers of a human and a queen who stood together against a fleet and made them retreat. Ethan didn't set out to become a symbol, but in that moment, far beyond Earth's sky, humanity had answered, and the galaxy would never see them the same way again.